for what's coming. He's preparing them in this moment. He's prepared them twice before. And in our passage this morning, we're going to see that the disciples were indeed not prepared. They're going to immediately go to something else that's on their mind. They're going to sort of discard what Jesus just said last week, that we talked about last week, and we're going to see that their minds are going to be someplace else. And they're actually going to be worried about who's going to be first among them. If their disciples are going to challenge each other for who's going to be top dog, which is funny because Jesus had already said that them as the 12 disciples in the future are going to rule over the 12 tribes of Israel as judges. But that wasn't enough for them because they wanted to be first among the judges. It wasn't good enough to be over the 12 tribes of Israel. I want to be first among the tribes. But interesting, in our passage this morning, it's actually we're going to see something surprising from Jesus. Jesus isn't actually going to outright rebuke their ambition. He's not going to say you're wrong for wanting to be first, but he's going to redirect them into what is going to be necessary to actually be first. So they're going to want to be first, and Jesus says that's actually a good thing, but it's going to look a lot different than you're expecting. And so what I want us to get from this passage just at the forefront is this idea that Jesus does not say that their desire is bad to be first. But he says, in order to be first, here's what you're going to need to do. And so it's going to sound like, it's not good to any sort of leadership. But that's actually not what Jesus calls us to this morning. He wants us to actually seek out leadership. And we're going to show what that looks like later on in the passage. But as we seek to be leaders, we want to do it in the right way. So let's jump right into the text. Matthew chapter 20, verse 20 says this. Then the mother of the sons of Zebedee came up to him with her sons, and kneeling before him, she asked him for something. And he said to her, "What do you want?" She said to him, "Say that these two sons of mine are to sit, one at your right hand and one at your left, in your kingdom." Jesus answered, "You do not know what you are asking. Are you able to drink the cup that I am to drink?" They said to him, "We are able." He said to them, "You will drink my cup, but to sit at my right hand and at my left is not mine to grant, but it is for those for whom it has been prepared by my Father." And when the 10 heard it, they were indignant at the two brothers. But Jesus called them to him and said, "You know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great ones exercise authority over them. It shall not be so among you. But whoever would be great among you must be your servant, and whoever would be first among you must be your slave. Even as the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many." So around the 1930s, there was this famous Harvard study, and it tracked 724 men over a 75-year period. And it was looking to find out what gives people the most satisfaction in life. And before I tell you the results of the study, it's important for me to say that in general, I don't really trust any studies or anything that people come out with, because statistics, you can kind of fudge numbers and lie. But when they support what I'm trying to preach, then I'll use them. So here's the results of the study. The things that made people most satisfied at the end of their life, it's not how much money they made, it's not the career they chose, it's not the status that they achieved in life, it's not the location that they were in. It's actually not that surprising. What people valued most that led to the ultimate satisfaction in their life were close, long-term, loving relationships. Close, long-term, loving relationships across all different types of people were seen to give the most satisfaction. And I think this is paired along with not just having close relationships, but leaving your mark on the world. There's something inside of us buried beneath all the messiness of what we do with our lives, that wants to make a difference in this world. We want to at least make one lasting effect on this world. And a lot of times that can come out in the relationships we've made. If we've touched just one person in a unique way, then we've actually made a mark on the world. And it's the reason that we all don't just go to some hut in Alaska by ourselves in the wilderness. As good as that might sound to me, we all want to be around other people. We don't want to just live alone and be alone and not affect anyone around us and just die by ourselves. We want to make a difference in the world. And so our passage this morning, Jesus is going to emphasize the goodness of actually wanting to make a difference in the world. But the disciples in this passage, they want to make a difference in terms of authority. They want to just bring down the hammer. They want to have this authority, but they don't want the responsibility that always should come with authority. And so Jesus is going to pair those two things, authority with responsibility. And Jesus is going to give us a powerful text here to work through. And we're going to see that we need to have this desire to lead, this desire to make a difference, but we need to be redirected, as the disciples were, into what that should look like. So let's jump again back through the text. Verse 20, then the mother of the sons of Zebedee came up to him with her sons, and kneeling before him, she asked him for something. And he said to her, what do you want? She said to him, say that these two sons of mine are to sit one at your right hand and one at your left in your kingdom. So we open up this passage in kind of an odd way. In the Gospel of Mark, it actually just says that James and John asked Jesus this question. But Matthew makes sure to say it actually wasn't them that was asking. They had their mother go ask Jesus. They say, Mom, can you actually go ask Jesus this question? They don't want the responsibility of actually having to say, well, we asked Jesus this question. So when the other disciples complain, they could be like, well, it's not us. It was our mom who asked the question. And so I don't really know what to make of the mother. I don't know if she was actually doing it with a good heart in order just for other people, for the disciples, or she was sort of just abdicating their responsibility, where she was taking that responsibility instead of having the disciples themselves, James and John namely, go up to Jesus. And so she sort of allowed them to take the coward's way out. She approached Jesus in a humble way. She got on her knees. She did everything right. She asked not for herself, but for others. So in that sense, I think she did everything right. But she also didn't allow the disciples to actually take that responsibility, which is going to be a theme. It's going to be a theme of taking the coward's way out, not wanting the responsibility, but wanting to lord your power over everyone else. And then we get into verse 22. So she asks, say that these two sons of mine are to sit at your right hand and your left hand. And then Jesus answered, you do not know what you are asking. Are you able to drink the cup that I am to drink? And they said to him, we are able. And so in meditating over this passage for a long period of time, you can kind of see that the disciples, they want to just jump all in. And there's a good heart behind that. They say, Jesus, we are able. We don't know what in the world this cup is, but whatever it is, we're just going to go for it. We're going to be all in. And this sort of reminds me of a famous quote from an old show where someone's trying to get someone else to invest in something, and the guy just spends like 1 second. He's like, thought about it, I'm in. And just like that, the disciples are the same way. They don't even have to think about what Jesus is offering. They just immediately, I'm in. And there's a good desire there that when God asks you to do something, are you going to be all in? Are you going to have to take a long time to think about it? There's another famous quote where it says, it's easier to cool down a fanatic than it is to warm up a corpse. So if we have no desire at all for God, if we have no desire for ministry, then it's going to be really hard to put that person in a leadership position. It's going to be really hard to let that person serve. But if you have someone who's just misguided, but the heart's there, they want to serve God, but they just do it wrong a lot of times, you can just redirect that person. And so that desire for leadership, that desire to want to make a difference is a good desire, and it should not be seen as something to condemn, but something to promote. And as Christians, we all live our Christian lives, and at times we all make dumb decisions. I expected an amen there, but I guess not everyone makes dumb decisions here. Yeah. So we all make dumb decisions, but a lot of times we can have the right heart and still make a dumb decision, right? We can have the right heart behind something, but we implement it in just a terrible way. And so the disciples here, they have the right heart. They want to take the cup that Jesus is offering them, but they just have no idea what it's going to be. And so Jesus tells them that they actually will take this cup. Verse 23, he said to them, "You will drink my cup, but to sit at my right hand and at my left is not mine to grant, but it is for those for whom it has been prepared for my Father." So this week I was in a pastor's meeting, and we were talking through what is this cup that Jesus is talking about. He doesn't explicitly define what the cup is. And immediately, just on its face, I thought the cup was just this idea of the cup of suffering. Jesus is going to suffer, and he's going to go to the cross, and in the same way, the disciples are going to suffer for their faith. And so maybe the cup that Jesus is telling them they're going to drink is suffering. But throughout the Old Testament, we actually have this idea of a cup being a good thing given from God. But we also have the cup being a bad thing. And so to sort of show you this in the Old Testament real quick, if you go to Psalm chapter 23, we hear this first mention of a cup. In one of the most famous Psalms, it says this, Psalm 23:5, "You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil, my cup overflows. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever." So in this context, David says the cup is the cup of blessing, the cup of grace given to him by God. The cup is seen in a positive way here. But if we jump to Psalm 75:8, still in the Psalms, we see a different understanding of the cup. Psalm 75:8, "For in the hand of the Lord there is a cup with foaming wine, well mixed, and he pours out from it, and all the wicked of the earth shall drain it down to the dregs." So this is not the cup that you want. We have this cup of blessing, and we have this cup of suffering. And last week we saw Jesus give us a really, really important principle, not just what's going to happen for him, but what's going to happen for us. And it's this idea that the cross comes before glory. So we have to bear our cross if we want to experience the glory in the end. And in Romans 8:16 through 17, we can see this idea about what we must do before we taste of the glory in heaven. Romans 8:16, "The Spirit himself bears witness with our spirit that we are children of God, and if children, then heirs, heirs of God and fellow heirs with Christ." Then here's the key, provided we suffer with him, in order that we may also be glorified with him. So suffering comes before glory. And in 2 Timothy 2:12, Paul says, if we want to reign with him, then we must endure. If we endure, we will also reign with him. But if we deny him, he will also deny us. So it's not just actually glory. It says what glory is going to look like. And then we're actually going to reign with Christ in heaven. We're going to be given some responsibility in heaven. So right now on earth, we have to understand how to balance that authority and that responsibility. And so Jesus, again, he redirects their focus. And he says, don't worry about sitting at my right hand or my left hand, because the Father has prepared that in the end. So don't worry about what exactly that reward is going to look like. Focus on your calling. And so in this life, we don't focus on what's God going to give us in the end, because anything God gives us is going to be a grace. So we don't worry about what's it going to look like, but we do worry about what he calls us to in this life. We need to be redirected to focus on our calling and not just the reward. And a good example of this is the idea of a marathon. If you're running a marathon and you start, I've never ran a marathon and don't plan to, but for my marathon runners in the room, if there is any, you don't focus on how you're going to finish. You don't just think, oh, I'm going to finish in this way, I'm going to do this little dance at the end, but you focus on each step as you're running, because that next step is going to keep getting harder and harder and harder. So you focus on what's in front of you. You focus on where you're running. You focus on not running into other people, maybe getting some water along the way. You focus on what's in front of you, and you don't focus on what's at the very, very end. So in the same way, we live our Christian walks like we're running a marathon, just taking the next step, walking with the Spirit. Notice it says that we should walk with the Spirit, not run with the Spirit. We don't stand still with the Spirit. We walk with the Spirit. We don't run. We take each step one step at a time. Then we have verse 24. And when the 10 heard it, they were indignant at the two brothers. But Jesus called them to him and said, you know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great ones exercise authority over them. So the idea of aspiring to authority is not the bad part, but it's the kind of authority that they're aspiring to that's the bad part. They want to just rule over somebody else, which basically means I want to tell everyone else what to do. And we all have that desire in us as well. I don't want to do anything, and I want to tell everyone else what to do. That's where all this messiness comes in with leadership in America, in the world. Do people generally think that leadership is good in this country? I would say more often than not, no. If your guy's in it, maybe, but most of the time, all of us recognize the corruptness that authority has, because people who get all the way at the top are not focused at the people all the way on the bottom. And so you have this corruption of authority, and Jesus says, it's not going to be like this with you. With my church, it's not going to be like that. And he talks about the Gentiles. So the immediate Gentiles, the ones who rule over Jerusalem, would be the Romans. And right after Jesus dies and is raised again, there's this emperor that comes on the scene named Caligula. And he's known as one of the worst Roman emperors that there ever was. And Caligula would do all this stuff to flex his authority. So if you were the emperor of Rome, you had senators with you, and you were over the senators, but generally you wanted to keep them sort of at ease. You wanted to get them on your side. But Caligula would ride his chariot horse, and he would make the senators run next to them for miles and miles and miles, just to humiliate the aristocratic class and even the high-end people around him. He would mock them all the time. He would say that he is God, and he would demand other people to worship him. And he would actually have these parties where he would order people's executions as part of the party. So this was a very, very corrupt person in a place of authority. And surprise, surprise, he was assassinated. And surprise, surprise, the next person who came in after him still wasn't very good. And the surprising statistic, about a third of the Roman emperors were assassinated. 1/3. And it's kind of a joke that it was one of the most dangerous positions in the Roman Empire was to be the emperor, because they were killed more often than almost anyone else, because they wanted to have all the authority, tell everyone what to do, but they didn't do the responsibility that came along to it. And I would say for us as Christians, even in America, that when we read a passage like this, we can be tempted to just not want the authority at all. Because with the authority, we know is going to come the responsibility. So there's a temptation for us to just say, I don't want any of it. I just want to sort of keep my head down and do what I'm supposed to do and not worry about other people. But Christ calls us to discipleship. You say, Pastor Braden, I don't want to be a leader. And it's like, too bad. Because the Bible calls us all to be leaders. We are all called to be discipled, and we're all called to disciple other people around us. But this is hard for us. And I remember I've done young adult ministry for about the past 5 years. And what I always see, there's a very common thread that happens, is that when I ask people, do you want to be discipled by someone else? A lot of hands would go up. I want to be discipled. But when the question is asked, do you want to disciple someone else? Fewer hands go up. Because people don't want to take the time to actually serve someone else in trying to disciple them. Because you got to worry about, well, when are we going to meet? Do I have time in my schedule? What are we going to go through? I got to, sort of find stuff to go through. What if they ask me a question I don't know? What about? And you can see if you handle leadership like you're supposed to, if you have that responsibility with leadership, it becomes really difficult to be a good leader. But just because it's difficult doesn't mean that we're still not called to do it. We're called to be disciples. And so Jesus sums up what it should look like if we're going to be leaders in this life. If as the church we're called to be leaders, Jesus is going to say, this is what it should look like. Verse 26, it shall not be so among you, but whoever would be great among you must be your servant. And whoever would be first among you must be your slave. And so Jesus focuses all on responsibility. If you're going to be number one, if you're going to be the first, that means you need to serve the most, which is a beautiful structure of the way Christ set up his church. That the person who serves the most should be given the biggest title. The one who cares the most about those around them should be given the first seat at the table, because that authority is ultimately tied with that responsibility. And in the ancient world, it's much more common to this idea of servant leadership. There's been a lot of books written about what it means to be a servant leader, to care about your followers, to want the best for them, to serve them in that way, to see what their needs are. But in the ancient world, it would have been seen as completely oxymoronic. This idea of a servant being a leader. Those two things seem like exact opposites. No, the leader leads and the servant serves. But Jesus flips it. He says, in my church, there's going to be leaders who are servants to everyone. Amazing, amazing concept from a beautiful Savior who wants a church not about corruption and power, but a church of humility, where the person at the top serves the most out of all the people at the bottom. And so 1 Peter, we get this idea of what a shepherd's job in leading should look like. So this would be my call as leading the church as a pastor. Peter gives this exhortation. 1 Peter 5 says this, so I exhort the elders among you as a fellow elder and a witness of the sufferings of Christ, as well as a partaker in the glory that is going to be revealed. Shepherd the flock of God that is among you, exercising oversight, not under compulsion, but willingly, as God would have you, not for shameful gain, but eagerly, not domineering over those in your charge, but being examples to the flock. So Peter says the authority is a good thing. You're called to be an authority, but you don't exercise it in a bad way. You don't exercise it in a prideful way, but you do it from humility. You set the example to the rest of the flock. And in Luke, he would describe this principle in Luke chapter 12, verse 48, which says this, Luke 12:48. But the one who did not know and did what deserved a beating will receive a light beating. Everyone to whom much was given, of him much will be required. And from him to whom they entrusted much, they will demand more. Or as Spider-Man stole it, with great power comes great responsibility. If you've seen Spider-Man. So there's this idea that if you want that first place, you're going to have to be the servant to everyone. And this is going to be very, very hard for all of us if we just think about the difficulty of leadership in this life. And I'm going to go through some of the hardest things about leadership in this life. But just the first example that really comes to mind is raising a family. Is it easy or hard to raise a family? Hard. Anyone say easy? I don't think so. It's difficult to raise a family. Why? Because of the family. It's hard to lead people. It's hard to lead people, especially when they don't want to be led. It's hard to be the boss. It's hard to lead a congregation. It's hard to do these things because of these specific reasons. It's hard because of the followers. It's hard because of competitors. It's hard because of decision making. And it's hard because you're sort of isolated as the leader. And going through kind of those four categories, if you think how hard it is to lead people, a leader just means someone who has followers. A lot of times followers don't want to follow. And so then it's up to you to be patient and try to get them to follow, but that doesn't always work out. And so you have the difficulty of those who you're leading. Then you have the difficulties of the competitors. And the disciples struggled with this. They each were vying for that top spot. And so as the leader, a lot of times people are going to come for you, especially in our environment, our capitalistic system. It's, whoever's the best is going to be the best, and you got to beat the best in order to be the best. I think I got that right. But you have this idea of this competition for who's going to be on top. And Jesus says the competition is who's going to serve the most, which just puts it all into a weird balance that we're not used to. So we have followers, we have competitors, then we have decision making. You have to be the one as a leader to look forward to what you're going to do. If failure happens, it's going to be on you. You're going to have to accept that failure, and that pride is going to lead to humility once you fail. And then you have all that pressure of being the person who's supposed to make the decisions. You have all the pressure, which leads to that isolation feeling. That sometimes if you are leading people, it can feel like everyone's against you and you're isolated. Which is why Jesus gives us a great comfort in this last verse. He says this, even as the Son of Man came, not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. So Christ did it before us, and we can always look to Christ as our great example. Jesus, before the world even existed, he was up at the very, very top in all glory with the Father, and then he came all the way to the bottom. He went from all the way from the top to the bottom and then back up to the top. And he did all this to show us how we go from being at the bottom to going all the way back up to the top. And he describes this as service. And Jesus served us in the ultimately most beautiful way by going to that cross of suffering, that he didn't have to, that at any moment he could have stopped what was going on. He could have called angels down from heaven to take him off the cross, but every single chance he had, he immediately decided to serve others. He decided to serve the world by dying on the cross to take care of this sin problem that we all have. And this sin problem is definitely going to come up whenever we try to disciple others. Because how do we call people to something in which we struggle with? It's very, very difficult, but that's why we're called to this humility. And we look to Christ, who is the ultimate humble servant for each of us. We look to Christ. Then we have the last verse that we're going to read once we finish Matthew. And this is the charge that Jesus gives us as he is on top. Matthew 28, verse 18 says this, and Jesus came and said to them, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. So Jesus is now in this state of authority. He's already gone through the cross. Now he's in a state of glory. And then he gives us this charge who are still here on this earth. Go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, and also teaching them to observe all that I have commanded you. And behold, I am with you always to the end of the age. And so as we wrap up and we are headed to a time of prayer and worship, I pray that you would just reflect on who around you is in need of someone to disciple them. Who around you needs discipleship? And who can you be discipled by? Who can push you towards Christ more? And who can you push towards Christ more? And so I pray as we reflect on these things that whenever we realize how hard authority can be, maybe you're in a place of authority at your work or at your home or with the people around you, let's just all look to Christ as our ultimate example. Whenever things get tough, We lean on him whose knowledge surpasses all understanding. So with all that, let's turn to the Lord in prayer. God, we thank you so much for the gift of your Son. God, we thank you so much that Jesus came not with a sword, but he came with his arms out on the cross. God, we're so thankful for that sacrifice that we can look to for so many different things in this life, that we can look to whenever we're going through difficult trials, that we can look to whenever we're struggling with our salvation, knowing if we're saved. We just look to you, God. We look to the cross. We look to the beautiful, wondrous cross in which Jesus paid it all. And we sang it earlier, and I hope that it sinks into our heart on what that means, not just for our eternity, but for our every day. God, I pray we would just reflect on this text, and we would seek to do what you have called us to. I pray this all in Jesus' name. Amen.